Good afternoon and welcome to Friday afternoon meditation at the Newport Ritchie Library. My name is Ken Sigmund and I'm the teacher with Gulf Coast Insight Meditation. And we meet here every Friday and every other Wednesday evening at Third Eye Store in Holiday. So feel free. I'm going to offer a guided meditation for about half an hour, and then we'll talk some about that, and then there's time for questions. Unfortunately, anybody watching on Zoom, I'm not really set up to take questions on Zoom, but you can always text or email me, and I will get back to you. We've been talking about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. There are 4 foundations of mindfulness. This is a mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness as the art of being present with what's happening in the present moment, without judgment or evaluation or attachment or aversion. There are 4 foundations for that. Mindfulness of thinking, and I spent a lot of time on that in the earlier groups. Mindfulness of feelings, or feeling tones, not necessarily sad, happy, mad, glad, but feelings pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Mindfulness of the body, and I've just spent a couple of weeks on that. And there's mindfulness of what's referred to as mental formations, which is basically the attitudes and preconceived notions that we carry with us through which we filter the world. The world is not as we filter it. The world is as it is. But we all have filters. We all have attitudes and beliefs and concepts. Sometimes we're aware of them, sometimes we're not. And I'm going to talk about that today. I stress that this is a gentleness practice. You cannot do it wrong. Your mind is going to wander off into some sort of thought or series of thoughts, stories, scenarios, things of the past, things of the future, whatever. And when you notice, just bring it back. Start again, without recrimination, without wondering whether you're doing it right or wrong, because you are doing it right, because the doing it is the doing it. It doesn't matter how many times you have to do that. It doesn't matter how long you're like off in some sort of thought stream. When you noticed, just come back. So let's start by finding a meditation posture. And that is one in which you can be relaxed and alert at the same time. If you're sitting in a chair with your back straight, but not like rigid, just relaxed. Better if you're kind of sitting upright. If you're like slouched back, you're actually more likely to nod off and not be able to focus. Some people have asked me about meditating lying down. It's a perfectly okay thing to do. The suggestion is if you're going to meditate laying down, you have your forearm on the floor and your hand in the air. Your arm is at a 90-degree angle. That way, if you fall asleep, your hand comes down, you wake up. So, and if your back is like relaxed and straight, and if it's like you had a little string at the crown of your head that was like tugging up just a little bit, straighten the top of your spine without straining the muscles on your neck or shoulders. You tuck in your chin a little bit. And gently close your eyes. And let's start with a few slow, deep breaths. Just to get connected. Slow, deep breath in, about three quarters. And as you exhale, just begin the process of softening, relaxing, relaxing the muscles in your face, muscles around your eyes. Slow, deep breath in, long, slow breath out. Continuing to notice, scan through your body, your shoulders and chest, any place you notice any tension or holding or tightness. Just letting go of that as best you can, just breathing with it. And letting your breathing return to normal. And continuing on the out breath to relax the shoulders and the chest, and the belly. We often hold our bellies tight. This is a soft belly practice. And I invite you to become aware of the contact points. Notice the sensations of your feet contacting the floor. Noticing what it feels like to have your hands resting on your lap. Noticing the gentle pull of gravity, letting your weight settle into the chair or the cushion or the bed or whatever you're sitting on. Just noticing how your body feels in this moment. And letting your attention and your focus rest on your breathing, on the sensations of the body breathing in and out. In whatever way that's easiest for you. Just noticing normal breathing, the gentle rhythm of the body breathing in and out. When your mind wanders off, you notice that you're thinking, that the mind is drifted into thinking. Don't worry about it. That's what the mind does. That's what it's supposed to do. And without getting caught up in the narrative, the story, or the process, just notice thinking as a phenomenon in itself. And gently slide your attention back to the breath. If it's helpful, on the in breath, and say quietly to yourself, in, and on the out breath, say quietly to yourself, out. It's letting your mind and your body settle. Thoughts arise, feelings arise, they come, they go. Just notice thinking without getting involved in the narrative or the story. Just notice your mind has gone to thinking. And when you notice, just start over again with the breath. And as we come towards the end of this sitting, I invite you to notice any kind of centeredness or settledness that may have set in these minutes. And maybe the settledness from this process just helps us move through the days a little more calmly, a little more centered, to help us meet the world and ourselves with kindness and compassion. To offer our presence a little more gently in our interactions. May the benefits of this practice be of benefit to all beings everywhere. May all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. May all beings be well. May all beings be at ease and at peace. And may we contribute to that with our calm, centered presence. Thank you for your practice. As I said earlier, kind of surfing through the four foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness of thinking, mindfulness of feeling, not so much what we're feeling, but what it feels like, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Mindfulness of the body, because the body is where we receive all of our information. It's where we experience our lives. Things start off as a sensation of some sort, and then somewhere in our minds, we translate that into an experience that we recognize. And fourth is mindfulness of mental formations, attitudes, preconceived notions that we may or may not be aware of. Some years ago, I was on a meditation retreat at a place called Cloud Mountain, which is a meditation retreat center in the middle of nowhere, 90 miles north of Portland, Oregon. These retreat centers are beautiful. They're out in the woods, kind of remote, week-long retreat. And around day 3 or 4, maybe 5, there's this big wooden deck. It's out in the woods. I'm sitting there, I'm meditating. It's right after the rain. So, the woods is really lush and smells really sweet after the rain. It's just beautiful, and I'm sitting there. And this thought goes by. You're doing this wrong. You're screwing this up. And I'm like, startled me a little bit. What can I possibly be doing wrong or screwing up? I am literally just sitting here for no other reason than just to sit here. I don't meditate to get somewhere. I meditate to meditate. And I noticed and I realized that I've had that thought off and on about one thing or another my entire life. It's kind of a default setting. We all have our default settings. It's preconditioned. We all have these conditionings. We all have preconditioned thoughts about ourselves and our lives and the world around us that are not actually our thoughts and our, they're not actually our lives and the people around us. They're just preconditioned concepts by which we filter the world. And mindfulness helps us be aware of that. Because the truth is, I wasn't screwing up. I was just sitting there. I was a therapist in private practice for like 20 years. Sometimes it's really busy, sometimes not so much. I would have anxiety when it slowed down. Oh my God, we're going to run out of money. We never ran out of money. We're not able to pay the bills. I paid the rent of my office. Then there was that thing again, I'm screwing up. People aren't coming because I'm not very good at this, which really makes no sense at all when you think about it. The universe at large would have to have decided that I'm not very good at it, then be conspiring somehow for my office to slow down. But it's this piece of conditioning that I have. It's the lens through which we begin to look at ourselves in the world. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about how that comes about. Sharon Salzberg, it's one of my favorite meditation teachers and publishers on the subject. She wrote, "The quality of our lives can be limited by the thought patterns that produce much of our constriction, such as unexamined assumptions. Sometimes, perhaps most of the time, we don't even notice the ideas we hold ourselves and our experience, our friends, our family. And so we tend to accept these preconceived judgments as hastily drawn conclusions. Anxiety is about the world, truths about the world, truths about us. And just as I've said several times, our thoughts are real, but they are not truths. We hear them, they're real, but they are not true in that they are not reflections of what's actually going on in the moment. These preconceived attitudes, they're real, but they're not truths. They're just a lens through experiences that we have accumulated and things that have happened to us, we develop these lenses through which we see the world, but it's not the world itself.
Is it like when I read people say you are what you think? Like if you think too much, then that kind of comes through?
Well, maybe.
Action, maybe.
Where I go when you ask that, whether we are what we think, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are.
You are good.
And if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you look at your conditioning, it's always in somebody else's handwriting. It's not even your voice. Usually from one or two places, mom or dad. This is not about blaming or shaming or any of that. This is just the way the dynamics and the brain is wired throughout childhood. The brain is not, well, it's not really completely wired ever, but it's not at a relative set point until you're like 24 to 27. That's when the cerebral cortex is mostly fully developed. My mother lived her life believing, apparently, that she was on the verge of a catastrophe. She was very pessimistic. Things were not going to work out. She was always had intense anxiety about money. We never ran out of money. We were not homeless. But that was just kind of how she lived her life, going from one crisis to the next. And she had some very serious mental health issues that accounted for and contributed to that. I've inherited some of that.
Your anxiety.
My anxiety about money, which is completely displaced. There's a negative thought that things are not going to work out, but I have been working very hard at adopting optimism as an attitude. My father, also a child of the Depression, money was very, very important to him. But he was extremely critical. I'm not blaming him because he grew up with this. He was extremely critical of me. I could never do anything right in front of him. He was always the first person to tell me I was screwing up. Even when I got the job at the San Francisco Chronicle and got nominated for awards, he found something. So here we are all these years later. He's been dead since 1991. Now I have that.
Of yourself?
Yeah, now I can be critical. And it helps me to recognize where that comes from. It's not my voice. It's not the voice of a higher power. And mindfulness as a practice, and I suggest you practice this 20 minutes a day. I have instructions over there on how to do it. We train the mind a little bit at a time, little by little. The effects of mindfulness are subtle but cumulative, and we will start to notice more often when we're acting on some preconceived notion. I'm a writer. I made a living as a writer for years. I was a newspaper guy. It's been a long time since I was a professional writer. Nobody's paying me to do that anymore, but I still do it. I write a blog, I write poetry, I like to write. It works for me. And there's this ongoing inside joke about writers. Writing involves sitting in front of a blank screen and probably crying for some period of time. You know, there's a guy who used to work with the newspaper, said, if someone tells you they want to grow up to be a reporter, kill them now while they're still happy. It's just kind of built in, and wondering whether or not you can do it and get you through it and all that stuff. It's just a standard writer's anxiety. And I got all the way to the San Francisco Chronicle. It's a fairly large newspaper, ninth largest paper in the country. And I was covering Silicon Valley, so I'm interacting with Steve Jobs and Hewlett and Packard. And at that level, and I feel like I'm faking it. I'm winning awards at it, right? I get nominated for a Pulitzer. I'm not saying that to brag, but I'm saying that to notice the disconnect between what I thought was happening and what was actually happening. I quoted Anais Nin a moment ago. We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And I don't know who said that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if I believe that the world is an oppressive place, then that's how I'm going to experience it. I was in India in 2012, and I met this guy. I'll never forget it. It's only this one chance encounter. He was on the side of the road. He was begging for alms. He probably had dysentery from drinking rice paddy water. Money or food. Probably sick, emaciated, dressed as Shiva, because some of them think that dressing like the gods brings them closer to the gods. But he's got like this joyous thing going on, right? And it like radiates on him. It's like this big beaming smile, and it's like it radiates like a light bulb. It's like a heat coming off of him. And I was like, I want that, you know. And so all the Hindi I know, which you're pretty much hearing now, and all the English he knows, which isn't really very much. I'm like, how do you do it? I mean, the guy sleeps on the side of the road and begs for food. And he goes, vertical, above ground, all good. That's the lens through which he saw the world. The rest of it, who cared? Above ground, all good. Now, I've talked in some of these sessions about I'm a recovering addict, and I grew up with addicts, and it was kind of a chaotic, sometimes violent environment. And I learned to not feel safe, because that felt safe. I learned to not trust feelings, because that felt unsafe. I learned if someone says, I love you, they're probably hiding a stick of dynamite. At some point, I decided I don't want to be that guy. You know, in the 12-step process, the 6th and 7th step, You examine your attitudes and you say, does this serve me? And I decided that doesn't serve me. Because here's how it works. Little baby, little bambino, bambina. The first task of parenting, what's the very first task of parenting, is to see the child. The child needs to feel seen before anything else. Something interrupts that process. A parent dies. A parent is an alcoholic. Something happens. The child experiences that as a wound. But at 2 or 3, doesn't have the cognitive ability to say, oh, wow, that hurts. So instead, constructs a protective layer around that, of attitudes and beliefs and concepts about himself, which reflects what happened and makes it manageable. A few years later, 5, 6, something else happens. I don't know very many 5-year-olds who will go marching into their parents' bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, I'm 5, I want to get to 6. This is not working for me, right? But they will internalize whatever is going on. If it's abuse, they will internalize, I'm not okay, because children are by nature narcissistic. I don't mean that negatively. They think everything has something to do with them. So flash forward into your 30s, and now you have this stuff. It's kind of like, Robert Bly, philosopher, writer, poet, referred to it as the long bag we drag behind us. Right? We spend the first half of our lives throwing stuff into the bag, and the first half of our lives pulling stuff out of the bag, right? Until we eventually drop the bag. This idea about addiction. I had health education in elementary and high school, and they taught us that addicts are bad. Addicts aren't bad, they're just sick. I wasn't a bad guy trying to do good. I was a sick person trying to get well. So was my mother. We have these attitudes and beliefs, and because the mind defaults negative, and there's actual neurobiology behind that, don't worry about it, they don't really serve our sense of well-being. That's the thing. They make us feel protected because we adopted them to feel protected. Because we needed to believe that the world was normal when we were 4. Otherwise, we feel like we were falling into a dark hole. But we grow up and we realize, oh, this doesn't have to be like this. We get to choose the assumptions that support our well-being. Now, the Buddha, I'm not teaching Buddhism per se, but this is informed by Buddhism, offered the idea that we suffer because of our attachments. We are attached to things that are changing all the time. So if I'm clinging to something that's like constantly in motion, there's going to be suffering that's yielded from that. And he identified 4 bases for that. Attachment to sense objects. I like the way that feels. Or aversion. I don't like that. But it changes all the time. So as soon as we cling to it, it changes. Now we're unhappy. Right? Or if it doesn't feel good, we're averse to it, like it's going to last forever, and then it changes and we don't know who we are. States of mind, attachment to states of mind. I feel good. I'm going to cling to that. If somebody's going to cut me off in traffic, I'm not going to feel so good, and I'm going to be teed off that now I don't feel so good anymore. So there's another form of attachment. Attachment to our identities, which is what we're talking about here. Attachment to a self-concept and a self-identity, which may or may not serve us. I have this body. This is exactly my father's body. Right? If you saw the 2 of us from behind, the only difference is he had a big head of bushy hair. I did not inherit that quality. All of my life, I was told my body should be different than it is. So I've had trouble feeling good about myself. None of that is my voice. This is me. If you don't like the package, feel free to walk away. Yeah, I mean, body image in America, especially the way we treat women around body image in America, it's a horrible thing. What if it turns out you're just fine right now, in this moment? I'm assuming none of us are going out and living the lives of Jeffrey Dahmer or Lizzie Borden. When I say that, we're all doing the best we can. We're all good-hearted, good-natured people. And the last one is attachment. The fourth one is attachment to views. The attachment to I have to be right. I'm right, you're wrong. We have an entire political system that is absolutely dysfunctional and revolves around that. And, yeah. So what if all of that is just a ghost? You know, at the moment before he was enlightened, Mara, the god of illusion, tried to stop the enlightenment through all this stuff at Buddha. Temptations, women, sensual pleasures, anxieties, doubts. You're not good enough was the last one. And Buddha simply opened his eyes and looked right at all of that and said, I see you, Mara. Let's have tea. So first he looked right at it, at his shadow, and then he met it with invitation and gentleness. Flash forward 2,500 years later, and I'm getting a meeting with one of the senior teachers who was visiting from Europe. I'm a groupie for that stuff. I will always like sign up for that. I'm talking to her about my anxiety at the time. And she taught me to say, when I'm looking into that, I see you, Mara. Let's have tea.
Like welcoming it.
Just, yeah. And when I'm meditating, I sometimes got very, I talk about it's okay that your mind does this thing. I still struggle with that. I had something go down with somebody some months ago, and I was very angry about that. And anger is okay. It's just a feeling like any other. What I discovered, what I needed, was to be able to look internally at that and say, I see you. The way a frightened child needs to be seen. We meet these things with some self-compassion, not with criticism. And we say, oh, that may not be me. The San Francisco Chronicle was not, in fact, moving my desk closer to the door. In fact, they were upset when I left. That just didn't work anymore. I went off to do something else. So Buddha suggested that we examine these things. We examine all things. He said, don't even take his word for it, he said. Don't believe it because it's scripture. Don't believe it because you've taught it, or you're taught it, you've heard it, and you've always believed it. Adopt it if it promotes the greater good. If it helps you feel good about yourself and your life. It's not much more complicated than that, but it's not that easy. And mindfulness helps us notice when, oh, that person who cut me off in traffic didn't do anything to me. Probably didn't even notice me. That person is being like rude, the white person is being like rude, isn't doing that to me. They're doing that to everyone. I just happen to be the person standing in front of it. That I am not a competent person turns out not to be true. I did really well as a journalist. I did really well as a shrink. I don't hurt people.
I find a lot of teachings from my mother are still ingrained in
Yeah.
me. And it's hard to
well, we can look at that and say, I see you, but I'm not going to go down the road with that. This is a reflection of how my mother felt about her life and her pain and anguish. She was bleeding. She was bleeding all over everybody around her. And it's also true, if you don't heal your wounds, you will bleed on people who didn't hurt you. So I offer this as an opportunity to be kind and gentle with yourself when you notice it. And if you keep coming to these talks, and you've been to a few, and some of you have been to a few, you will notice that I am always pointing towards self-compassion, always. So take this as an opportunity to be kind to the person in the mirror. And thank you for your kind attention. I have a mailing list over there if you want to leave your name and your email address, and my newsletter and other activities that I do around town related to this. I'm here every Friday. I'm in holiday every other Wednesday. Questions? Comments? Go back to being a cab driver, which isn't as far from being a therapist as you might think.
Cab driver, or like a bartender, right?
I was a bartender for a while too. Yeah, you know, jobs that involve listening to people.
Mine wasn't my mother so much as her mental health. It was the religion I was raised in.
I'm sorry.
It was the religion I was raised in with my mother.
Yeah, you get to decide whether or not that works for you.
But as an adult, I should be, but yet I'm so.
There are no shoulds. My father was an alcoholic. Does that mean that I should?